Hello. No one's here yet. Hello, whoever is here. Let's see. Right, I'm gonna give it like another 30 seconds. I don't have anything to talk about before we start. I don't think, because we've already started the book. So, yeah. Okay, let's start from we're picking up at chapter 5. Chapter 5, The Domestication of Hunch. My landlady, a voluble man, arranged my journey into the east. If a person wants to go visit fastnesses, he's got to cross the Kargov, over the mountains, into Old Karhide, to Rare, the king's old city. Now, I'll tell you, a hearthfellow of mine runs a landboat caravan over the Eskar Pass, and yesterday he was telling me, over a cup of orsh, that they're going to make their first trip this summer on Gethenian Osme. It having been such a warm spring, and the road already clear up to Engohar, and the plows will have the pass clear in another couple days. Now, you won't catch me crossing the Karga of Erenrong for me and a roof over my head. But I'm a Yomeshta, praise to the 900 throne upholders, and blessed be the milk of Mesha, and one can be a Yomeshta anywhere. We're not newcomers, see. We're a lot of newcomers, see, for my lord Mesha was born 2,202 years ago, but the old way of the Handara goes back 10,000 years before that. You have to go back to the old land if you're after the old way. Now look here, Mr. I. I'll have a room in this island for you whenever you come back. But I believe you're a wise man to be going out of Erenrong for a while, for everybody knows that the traitor made a great show of befriending you with the palace. Now, with old Tybe as the king's ear, things will go smooth again. Now, if you go down to the new port, you'll find my hearthfellow there, and if you tell him I sent you, and so on. He was, as I said, voluble, and having discovered that I had no Shifgrithor, took every chance to give me advice, though even he disguised it with ifs and as ifs. He was the superintendent of my island. I thought of him as my landlady, for he had fat buttocks that wagged as he walked, and a soft fat face, and a prying, spying, ignoble, kindly nature. He was good to me, and also showed my room when I was out to thrill seekers for a small fee. See the mysterious envoy's room. He was so feminine in looks and manner that I once asked him how many children he had. He looked glum. He had never borne any. He had, however, sired 4. It was one of the little jolts I was always getting. Cultural shock was nothing much compared to the biological shock I suffered as a human male among human beings who were, 5/6 of the time, hermaphroditic neuters. The radio bulletins were full of the doings of the new Prime Minister, Pemerharj Remir Taib. Much of the news concerned affairs up north in the Sinoth Valley. Taib evidently was going to press Karhide's claim in that region, precisely the kind of action which, on any other world at this stage of civilization, would lead to war. But on Gethen, nothing led to war. Quarrels, murders, feuds, forays, vendettas, assassinations, tortures, and abominations, all of these were in their repertory of human accomplishments, but they did not go to war. They lacked, it seemed, the capacity to mobilize. They behaved like animals in that respect, or like women. They did not behave like men or ants. At any rate, they never yet had done so. What I knew of Orgoreyn indicated that it had become, over the last 5 or 6 centuries, an increasingly mobilizable society, a real nation-state. The prestige competition, heretofore mostly economic, might force Karhide to emulate its larger neighbor, to become a nation instead of a family quarrel, as Estraven had said, to become, as Estraven had also said, patriotic. If this occurred, the Gethenians might have an excellent chance of achieving the condition of war. I wanted to go to I keep wanting to say Origin, which is not the correct word, wrong sci-fi series. I wanted to go to Orgoreyn and see if my guesses concerning it were sound, but I wanted to finish up with Karhide first. So I sold another ruby to the Scarface jeweler in Ang Street, and with no baggage but my money, my ansible, a few instruments, and a change of clothes, set off as a passenger on a trade caravan on the first day of the first month of summer. The land boats left at daybreak from the wind-swept loading yards of the new port. They drove under the arch and turned east 20 bulky, quiet-running barge-like trucks on caterpillar treads, going single file down the deep streets of Erenrung through the shadows of morning. They carried boxes of lenses, reels of sound tape, spools of copper and platinum wires, bolts of plant fiber cloth raised and woven in the Westfall, chests of dried fish flakes from the Gulf, crates of ball bearings and other small machine parts, and 10 truckloads of Orgota Kardik grain, all bound for the Paring storm border, the northeast corner of the land. All shipping on the great continent is by these electric-powered trucks, which go on barges on the rivers and canals where possible. During the deep snow months, slow tractor plows, power sledges, and the erratic ice ships on frozen rivers are the only transport besides skis and man-hauled sledges. During the thaw, no form of transport is reliable, so most freight traffic goes with a rush come summer. The roads then are thick with caravans. Traffic is controlled, each vehicle or caravan being required to keep in constant radio contact with checkpoints along the way. It all moves along, however crowded, quite steadily, at a rate of 25 miles per hour, Terran. Gethenians could make their vehicles go faster, but they do not. If asked why, they answer, why? Like asking Terrans why all our vehicles must go so fast, we answer, why not? No disputing tastes. Terrans tend to feel they've got to get ahead, make progress. The people of winter, who always live in the year one, feel that progress is less important than presence. My tastes were Terran, and leaving Erenrung, I was impatient with the methodical pace of the caravan. I wanted to get out and run. I was glad to get clear of those long stone streets overhung with black, steep roofs and innumerable towers, that sunless city where all my chances had turned to fear and betrayal. Climbing the Kargav foothills, the caravan halted briefly, but often for meals at roadside inns. Along in the afternoon, we got our first full view of the range from a foothill summit. We saw Koster, which is 4 miles high from foot to crest, The huge slant of its western slope hid the peaks north of it, some of which go up 30,000 feet. South from Costor, one peak after another stood out white against a colorless sky. I counted 13, the last an undefined glimmer in the mist of distance in the south. The driver named the 13 for me and told me stories of avalanches and land boats blown off the road by mountain winds and snowplow crews marooned for weeks in inaccessible heights and so on in a friendly effort to terrify me. He described having seen the truck ahead of his skid and go over a 1,000-foot precipice. What was remarkable, he said, was the slowness with which it fell. It seemed to take all afternoon floating down into the abyss, and he had been very glad to see it at last vanish with no sound at all into a 40-foot snowdrift at the bottom. At third hour, we stopped for dinner at a large inn, a grand place with vast roaring fireplaces and vast beam-roofed rooms full of tables loaded with good food, but we did not stay the night. Ours was a sleeper caravan, hurrying, in its Karhidish, to be the first of the season into the pairing storm country, to skim the cream of the market for its merchant entrepreneurs. The truck batteries were recharged, a new shift of drivers took over, and we went on. One truck of the caravan served as sleeper for drivers only, no beds for passengers. I spent the night in the cold cab on the hard seat, with one break along near midnight for supper at a little inn high. Karhide is no country for comfort. At dawn I was awake and saw that we had left everything behind except rock and ice and light, and the narrow road always going up and up under our treads. I thought, shivering, that there are things that outweigh comfort unless one is an old woman or a cat. No more inns now among these appalling slopes of snow and granite. At mealtimes, the land boats came silently to a halt, one after the other on some 30 degrees snow and encroached grade, and everyone climbed down from the cabs and gathered about the sleeper, from which bowls of hot soup were served, slabs of dried bread apple, and sour beer in mugs. We stood about stamping in the snow, gobbling up food and drink, backs to the bitter wind that was filled with a glittering dust of dry snow. Then back into the land boats and on and up. At noon in the passes of Wehoth, at about 14,000 feet, it was 82 degrees Fahrenheit in the sun and 13 degrees in the shade. The electric engines were so quiet that one could hear avalanches grumble down immense blue slopes on the far side of the chasms 20 miles across. Late that afternoon, we passed the summit at Eskar at 15,200 feet. Looking up the slope of the southern face of Costor, on which we had been infinitesimally crawling all day, I saw a queer rock formation a quarter mile or so above the road, a castle-like outcropping. "See the fastness up there?" said the driver. "That's a building. That's our Costor fastness. But no one could live up here." "Oh, the old men can. I used to drive in a caravan that brought up their food from Erenrong late in summer. Of course, they can't get in or out for 10 or 11 months of the year, but they don't care. There's 7 or 8 indwellers up there." I stared up at the buttresses of rough rock, solitary in the huge solitude of the heights, and I did not believe the driver, but I suspended my disbelief. If any people could survive in such a frozen eyrie, they would be Karhiders. The road descending swung far north and far south, edging along precipices, for the east slope of the Kargav is harsher than the west, falling to the plains in great stair steps, the raw fault blocks of the mountains making. At sunset, we saw a tiny string of dots creeping through a huge white shadow 7,000 feet below, a landboat caravan that had left Erenrong a day ahead of us. Late the next day, we had got down there and were creeping along that same snow slope, very softly, not sneezing, lest we bring down the avalanche. From there we saw for a while, away and below us eastward, vague, vast lands blurred with clouds and shadows of clouds, and streaked with silver rivers, the plains of Rare. At dusk of the fourth day, out from Aranrong, we came to Rare. Between the two cities lie 1,100 miles, and a wall several miles high, and 2,000 or 3,000 years. The caravan halted outside the western gate, where it would be shifted onto canal barges. No land boat or car can enter Rare. It was built before Karhiders used powered vehicles, and they have been using them for over 20 centuries. There are no streets in Rare. There are covered walks, tunnel-like, which in summer one may walk through or on top of as one pleases. The houses and islands and hearths sit every which way, chaotic, in a prodigious confusion that suddenly culminates, as anarchy will do in Karhide, in splendor. The great towers of the Unpalace, blood-red, windowless, built 17 centuries ago, those towers housed the kings of Karhide for 1,000 years, until Argoven Harj, first of his dynasty, crossed the Kargov and settled the great valley of the Westfall. All the buildings of Rare are fantastically massive, deep-founded, weatherproof and waterproof. In winter, the wind of the plains may keep the city clear of snow, but when it blizzards and piles up, they do not clear the streets, having no streets to clear. They use the stone tunnels or burrow temporary ones in the snow. Nothing of the houses but the roofs sticks out above the snow, and the winter doors may be set under the eaves or in the roof itself like dormers. The thaw is the bad time on that plain of many rivers. The tunnels then are storm sewers, and the spaces between buildings become canals or lakes, on which the people of Rare boat to their business, fending off small ice floes with the oars. And always, over the dust of summer, the snowy roof jumble of winter, or the floods of spring, the red towers loom, the empty heart of the city, indestructible. I lodged in a dreary, overpriced inn, crouching in the lee of the towers. I got up at dawn after many bad dreams, and paid the extortioner for bed and breakfast and inaccurate directions as to the way I should take, and set forth afoot to find Otherhord, an ancient fastness not too far from Rare. I was lost within 50 yards of the inn. By keeping the towers behind me, and the huge white loom of the Kargov on my right, I got out of the city headed south, and a farmer's child met on the road told me where I could turn off for Otherhord. I came there at noon. That is, I came somewhere at noon, but I wasn't sure where. It was mainly a forest or a thick wood, but the woods were even more carefully tended than is usual in that country of careful foresters, and the path led along the hillside right in among the trees. After a while, I became aware that there was a wooden hut just off the path to my right, and then I noticed a quite large wooden building a little farther off to my left, and from somewhere there came a delicious smell of fresh frying fish. I went slowly along the path, a little uneasy. I didn't know how the Handarata felt about tourists. I knew very little about them, in fact. The Handara is a religion without institutions, without priests, without hierarchy, without vows, without creed. I am still unable to say whether it has a god or not. It is elusive. It is always somewhere else. Its only fixed manifestation is in the fastnesses, retreats to which people may retire and spend the night or a lifetime. I wouldn't have been pursuing this curiously intangible cult into its secret places at all if I hadn't wanted to answer the question left unanswered by the investigators. What are the foretellers, and what do they actually do? I had been longer in Karhide now than the investigators had, and I doubted that there was anything to the stories of foretellers and their prophecies. Legends of prediction are common throughout the whole household of man. God speaks, spirits speak, computers speak. Oracular ambiguity or statistical probability provides loopholes, and discrepancies are expunged by faith. However, the legends were worth investigating. I hadn't yet convinced any Karhider of the existence of telepathic communication. They wouldn't believe it till they saw it, my position exactly regarding the foretellers of the Handara. As I went on along the path, I realized that a whole village or town was scattered about in the shadow of that slanting forest, as all as random as rare was, but secretive, peaceful, rural. Over every roof and path hung the boughs of the hemans, the commonest tree of winter, a stout conifer with thick, pale scarlet needles. Hemon cones littered the branching paths. The wind was scented with hemon pollen, and all the houses were built of dark hemon wood. I stopped at last, wondering which door to knock at, when a person came sauntering out of the trees and greeted me courteously. "Will you be looking for a dwelling place?" he asked. "I've come with a question for the foretellers." I had decided to let them take me, at first anyhow, for a Karhider. Like the investigators, I had never had any trouble passing as a native if I wanted to. Among all the Karhidish dialects, my accent went unnoticed, and my sexual anomalies were hidden by the heavy clothing. I lacked the fine, thick hair thatch and downward eye slant of the typical Gethenian, and was blacker and taller than most, but not beyond the range of normal variation. My beard had been permanently depilated before I left Olul. At the time, we didn't know yet about the pelted tribes of Perunter, who are not only bearded but hairy all over like white Terrans. Occasionally, I was asked how my nose got broken. I have a flat nose. Gethenian noses are prominent and narrow, with constricted passages, well adapted to breathing sub-freezing air. The person on the path at Otherhord looked with mild curiosity at my nose and answered, "Then perhaps you'll want to speak to the weaver. He's down in the glade now, unless he went out with the wood sledge. Or would you rather talk first to one of the celibates?" "I'm not sure. I'm exceedingly ignorant." The young man laughed and bowed. "I am honored," he said. "I've lived here 3 years, but haven't yet acquired enough ignorance to be worth mentioning." He was highly amused, but his manner was gentle, and I managed to recollect enough scraps of Handara lore to realize that I had been boasting, very much as if I'd come up to him and said, "I'm exceedingly handsome." "I mean, I don't know anything about the foretellers." "Enviable," said the young indweller. "Behold, we must sully the plain snow with footprints in order to get anywhere. May I show you the way to the glade? My name is Goss." It was a first name. "Genry," I said, abandoning my L. I followed Goss farther into the chill shade of the forest. The narrow path changed direction often, winding up the slope and down again. Here and there, near it or away off among the massive trunks of the hemans, stood the small forest-colored houses. Everything was red and brown, dank, still, fragrant, gloomy. From one of the houses drifted the faint whistling sweetness of a Karhidish flute. Goss went light and quick, graceful as a girl, some yards ahead of me. All at once his white shirt blazed out, and I came out after him from shadow into full sunlight on a wide green meadow. 20 feet from us stood a figure, straight, motionless, profiled, the scarlet hide and white shirt, an inlay of bright enamel against the green of the high grass. 100 yards beyond him stood another statue in blue and white. This one never moved or glanced our way all the time we talked with the first one. They were practicing the Handara discipline of presence, which is a kind of trance. The Handarata, given to negatives, call it an untrance, involving self-loss, self-augmentation, through extreme sensual receptiveness and awareness. Though the technique is the exact opposite of most techniques of mysticism, it probably is a mystical discipline, tending towards the experience of immanence. But I can't categorize any practice of the Handarata I can't categorize any practice of the Handara Harandarata with certainty. Goss spoke to the person in scarlet. As he broke from his intense movelessness and looked at us and came slowly towards us, I felt an awe of him. In that sunlight he shone of his own light. He was as tall as I, and slender, with a clear, open, and beautiful face. As his eyes met mine, I was suddenly moved to bespeak him, to try to reach him with the mind speech I had never used since I landed on Winter, and should not use yet. The impulse was stronger than the restraint. I bespoke him. There was no response. No contact was made. He continued to look straight at me. After a moment he smiled and said in a soft, rather high voice, "You're the envoy, aren't you?" I stammered and said, "Yes." "My name is Faxe. We're honored to receive you. Will you stay with us in Otherhorde a while?" "Willingly. I am seeking to learn about your practice of foretelling, and if there's anything I can tell you in return about what I am, where I come from." "Whatever you like," said Faxe with a serene smile. "This is a pleasant thing, that you should cross the ocean of space, and then add another 1,000 miles and a crossing of the Karga to your journey to come to us here. I wanted to come to Otherhorde because of the fame of its predictions. You want to watch us foretelling then, perhaps? Or have you a question of your own?" His clear eyes compelled truth. "I don't know," I said. "Nuseth," said he, "it doesn't matter. Perhaps if you stay a while, you'll find you have a question or no question. There are certain times, when the foretellers are able to meet together. So there are only certain times, when the foretellers are able to meet together. So in any case, you'd dwell with us some days." I did, and they were pleasant days. Time was unorganized except for the communal work, field labor, gardening, wood-cutting, maintenance, for which transients such as myself were called on by whatever group most needed a hand. Aside from the work, a day might pass without a word spoken. Those I talked with most often were young Goss and Faxe the weaver, whose extraordinary character, as limpid and unfathomable as a well of very clear water, was a quintessence of the character of the place. In the evenings, there might be a gathering in the hearth room of one or another of the low, tree-surrounded houses. There was conversation and beer, and there might be music, the vigorous music of Karhide, melodically simple but rhythmically complex, always played extempore. One night 2 indwellers danced, men so old that their hair had whitened and their limbs were skinny, and the downward folds of the outer eye corners half hid their dark eyes. Their dancing was slow, precise, controlled. It fascinated eye and mind. They began dancing during 3rd hour after dinner. Musicians joined in and dropped out at will, all but the drummer who never stopped his subtle changing beat. The 2 old dancers were still dancing at 6th hour, midnight, after 5 Terran hours. This was the first time I had seen the phenomenon of Dotha, the voluntary controlled use of what we call hysterical strength, and thereafter I was readier to believe tales concerning the old men of Handara. It was an introverted life, self-sufficient, stagnant, steeped in that singular ignorance prized by the Handarata and obedient to their rule of inactivity or non-interference. That rule, expressed in the word nuseth, which I have to translate as no matter, is the heart of the cult, and I don't pretend to understand it. But I began to understand Karhide better after a half-month in Otherhorde. Under that nation's politics and parades and passions runs an old darkness, passive, anarchic, silent, the fecund darkness of the Handara. And out of that silence inexplicably rises the foreteller's voice. Young Goss, who enjoyed acting as my guide, told me that my question to the foretellers could concern anything and be phrased as I like. The more qualified and limited the question, the more exact the answer, he said. Vagueness breeds vagueness, and some questions, of course, are not answerable. What if I ask one of those? I inquired. This hedging seemed sophisticated but not unfamiliar, but I did not expect his answer. The weaver will refuse it. Unanswerable questions have wrecked foretelling groups. Wrecked them? Do you know the story of the Lord of Shorth, who forced the foretellers of Asenfastness to answer the question, what is the meaning of life? Well, it was a couple thousand years ago. The foretellers stayed in the darkness for 6 days and nights. At the end, all the celibates were catatonic, the zanies were dead, the pervert clubbed the Lord of Shorth to death with a stone, and the weaver, he was a man named Mesha, the founder of the Yomesh cult. Yes, said Gus, and laughed as if the story was very funny, but I didn't know whether the joke was on the Yomeshta or on me. I had decided to ask a yes or no question, which might at least make plain the extent and kind of obscurity or ambiguity in the answer. Faxa confirmed what Gus had said, that the matter of the question could be one of which the foretellers were perfectly ignorant. I could ask if the Holm crops would be good this year in the northern hemisphere of S, and they would answer having no previous knowledge even of the existence of a planet called S. This seemed to put the business on the plane of pure chance divination, along with yarrow stocks and flipped coins. No, said Faxa, not at all. Chance was not involved. The whole process was in fact precisely the reverse of chance. Then you mind read. No, said Faxa with his serene and candid smile. You mind read without knowing you're doing it, perhaps. What good would that be? If the asker knew the answer, he wouldn't pay our price for it. I chose a question to which I certainly lacked the answer. Only time could prove the foretelling right or wrong, unless it was, as I expected, one of those admirable professional prophecies applicable to any outcome. It was not a trivial question. I had given up the notion of asking when it would stop raining, or some such trifle, when I learned that the undertaking was a hard and dangerous one for the 9 foretellers of Otherhorde. The cost was high for the asker. 2 of my rubies went to the coffers of the fastness, but it was higher for the answerers. And as I got to know Faxa, it became difficult to believe that he was a professional faker. Hang on. And as I got to know Faxa, if it became difficult to believe that he was a professional faker, it became still more difficult to believe that he was an honest, self-deluded faker. His intelligence was as hard, clear, and polished as my rubies. I dared set no trap for him. I asked what I most wanted to know. On Onethahard, the 18th of the month, the 9 met together in a big building usually kept locked. One high hall, stone-floored and cold, dimly lit by a couple of slit windows and a fire in the deep hearth at one end. They sat on the bare stone in a circle, all of them cloaked and hooded, rough, still shapes like a circle of dolmens in the faint glow of the fire yards away. Goss and a couple of other young indwellers, and a physician from the nearest domain, watched in silence from seats by the hearth while I crossed the hall and entered the circle. It was all very informal and very tense. One of the hooded figures looked up as I came amongst them, and I saw a strange face, coarse-featured, heavy, with insolent eyes, watching me. Faxa sat cross-legged, not moving, but charged, full of a gathering force that made his light, soft voice crack like an electric bolt. Ask, he said. I stood within the circle and asked my question. Will this world of Gethen be a member of the Ecumen of known worlds 5 years from now? Silence. I stood there. I hung in the center of a spider web. I'm going to take it again. I stood within the circle and asked my question. Will this world, Gethen, be a member of the Ecumen of known worlds 5 years from now? Silence. I stood there. I hung in the center of a spider web woven of silence. "It is answerable," the weaver said quietly. There was a relaxation. The hooded stones seemed to soften into movement. The one who had looked so strangely at me began to whisper to his neighbor. I left the circle and joined the watchers by the hearth. 2 of the foretellers remained withdrawn, unspeaking. One of them lifted his left hand from time to time and patted the floor lightly and swiftly 10 or 20 times, then sat motionless again. I had seen neither of them before. They were the zanies, Ghost said. They were insane. Ghost called them time dividers, which may mean schizophrenics. Karhidish psychologists, though lacking mind speech and thus like blind surgeons, were ingenious with drugs, hypnosis, spot shock, cryonic touch, and various mental therapies. I asked if these 2 psychopaths could not be cured. Cured? Ghost said. Would you cure a singer of his voice? 5 others of the circle were indwellers of Otherhorde, adepts in the Handara disciplines of presence, and also, said Gos, so long as they remained foretellers, celibate, taking no mate during their periods of sexual potency. One of these celibates must be in kemmer during the foretelling. I could pick him out, having learned to notice the subtle physical intensification, a kind of brightness that signals the first phase of kemmer. Beside the kemmerer sat the pervert. He came up from Spreva with the physician, Ghost told me. Some foretelling groups artificially arouse perversion in a normal person, injecting female or male hormones during the days before a session. It's better to have a natural one. He's willing to come, likes the notoriety. Gos used the pronoun that designates a male animal, not the pronoun for a human being in the masculine role of kemmer. He looked a little embarrassed. Karhiders discuss sexual matters freely and talk about kemmer with both reverence and gusto, but they are reticent about discussing perversion. At least, they were with me. Excessive prolongation of the kemmer period with permanent hormonal imbalance toward the male or the female causes what they call perversion. It is not rare. 3 or 4% of adults may be physiological perverts or abnormals, normals by our standard. They are not excluded from society, but they are tolerated with some disdain, as homosexuals are in many bisexual societies. The Karhidish slang for them is half-deads. They are sterile. The pervert of the group, after that first long, strange stare at me, paid no heed to anyone but the one next to him, the kemmerer, whose increasingly attractive sexuality would be further roused and finally stimulated into full female sexual capacity by the insistent, exaggerated maleness of the pervert. The pervert kept talking softly, leaning towards the kemmerer, who answered little and seemed to recoil. None of the others had spoken for a long time now. There was no sound but the whisper of the pervert's voice. Faxa was steadily watching one of the zanies. The pervert laid his hand quickly and softly on the kemmerer's hand. The kemmerer avoided the touch hastily, with fear or disgust, and looked across at Faxa as if for help. Faxa did not move. The kemmerer kept his place, and kept still when the pervert touched him again. One of the zanies lifted up his face and laughed a long, false, crooning laugh. Ah, 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 ah. Faxa raised his hand. At once, each face in the circle turned to him as if he had gathered up their gazes into a sheaf, a skein. It had been afternoon and raining when we entered the hall. The gray light had soon died out of the slit windows under the eaves. Now the whitish strips of light stretched like slanting phantasmal sails, long triangles and oblongs from wall to floor, over the faces of the 9. Dull scraps and shreds of light from the moon rising over the forest outside. The fire had burned down long since, and there was no light but those strips and slants of dimness creeping across the circle, sketching out a face, a hand, a moveless back. For a while, I saw Faxa's profile rigid as pale stone in a diffuse dust of light. The diagonal of moonlight crept on and came to a black hump, the kemmerer, head bowed to his knees, hands clenched on the floor, body shaken by a regular tremor repeated by the slutter pat-pat of the zany's hands on the stone in the darkness around the circle. They were all connected, all of them, as if they were the suspension points of a spider web. I felt, whether I wished or not, the connection, the communication that ran, wordless, inarticulate, through Faxa, and which Faxa was trying to pattern and control, for he was the center, the weaver. The dim light fragmented and died away, creeping up the eastern wall. The web of force, of tension, of silence grew. I tried to keep out of contact with the minds of the foretellers. I was made very uneasy by that silent electric tension, by the sense of being drawn in, of becoming a point or figure in the pattern, in the web. But when I set up a barrier, it was worse. I felt cut off and cowered inside my own mind, obsessed by hallucinations of sight and touch, a stew of wild images and notions, abrupt visions and sensations, all sexually charged and grotesquely violent, a red and black seething of erotic rage. I was surrounded by great gaping pits with ragged lips, vaginas, wounds, hellmouths. I lost my balance. I was falling. If I could not shut out this chaos, I would fall indeed. I would go mad, and there was no shutting it out. The emphatic and paraverbal forces at work, immensely powerful and confused, rising out of the perversion and frustration of sex, out of an insanity that distorts time, and out of an appalling discipline of total concentration and apprehension of immediate reality, were far beyond my restraint or control. And yet they were controlled. The center was still Faxa. Hours and seconds passed. The moonlight shone on the wrong wall. There was no moonlight, only darkness. And in the center of all darkness, Faxa, the weaver, a woman dressed in light. The light was silver. The silver was armor, an armored woman with a sword. The light burned, sudden and intolerable, the light along her limbs, the fire, and she screamed aloud in terror and pain, "Yes, yes, yes!" The crooning laugh of the zany began, ah, 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 and rose higher and higher into a wavering yell that went on, much longer than any voice could go on yelling, right across time. There was movement in the darkness, scuffling and shuffling, a redistribution of ancient centuries, an evasion of foreshadows. "Light, light," said an immense voice in vast syllables once or innumerable times. "Light, log on the fire there, some light." It was the physician from Spreva. He had entered the circle. It was all broken. He was kneeling by the zanies, the frailest ones, the fuse points. Both of them lay huddled up on the floor. The kemmerer lay with his head on Faxa's knees, breathing in gasps, still trembling. Faxa's hand, with absent gentleness, stroked his hair. The pervert was off by himself in a corner, sullen and dejected. The session was over. Time passed as usual. The web of power had fallen apart into indignity and weariness. Where was my answer? The riddle of the oracle, the ambiguous utterance of prophecy. I knelt down beside Faxa. He looked at me with his clear eyes. For an instant, I saw him as I had seen him in the dark, as a woman armed in light and burning in a fire, crying out, "Yes!" Faxa's soft-speaking voice broke the vision. "Are you answered, Asker?" "I am answered, Weaver." Indeed, I was answered. 5 years from now, Gethen would be a member of the Ekemen. Yes. No riddles, no hedging. Even then I was aware of the quality of that answer, not so much a prophecy as an observation. I could not evade my own certainty that the answer was right. It had the imperative clarity of a hunch. We have Nafal ships and instantaneous transmission and mind speech, but we haven't yet tamed hunch to run in harness. For that trick, we must go to Gethen. I serve as the filament, Faxa said to me a day or two after the foretelling. The energy builds up and builds up in us, always sent back and back, redoubling the impulse every time until it breaks through and the light is in me, around me. I am the light. The old man of Arbenfastness once said that if the weaver could be put in a vacuum at the moment of the answer, he'd go on burning for years. That's what the Yomeshta believe of Mesha, that he saw the past and future clear, not for a moment, but all during his life after the question of Shorth. It's hard to believe. I doubt a man could endure it, but no matter. Nusath, the ubiquitous and ambiguous negative of the Handara. We were strolling side by side, and Faxa looked at me. His face, one of the most beautiful human faces I ever saw, seemed hard and delicate as carved stone. In the darkness, he said, there were 10, not 9. There was a stranger. Yes, there was. I had no barrier against you. You are a listener, Faxa, a natural empath, and probably a powerful natural telepath as well. That's why you're the weaver, the one who can keep the tensions and responses of the group running in a self-augmenting pattern until the strain breaks the pattern itself and you reach through for your answer. He listened with grave interest. It is strange to see the mysteries of my discipline from the outside through your eyes. I've only seen them from within, as a disciple. If you permit, if you wish, Faxa, I should like to communicate with you in mind speech. I was sure now that he was a natural communicant. His consent and a little practice should serve to lower his unwitting barrier. Once you did that, I would hear what others think? No more than you already do as an empath. Mind speech is communication, voluntarily sent and received. Then why not speak aloud? One can lie, speaking. Not mind speaking? Not intentionally. Faxa considered a while. Faxa considered a while. That's a discipline that must arouse the interest of kings, politicians, men of business. Men of business fought against the use of mind speech when it first was found to be a teachable skill. They outlawed it for decades. Faxa smiled. And kings? We have no more kings. Yes, I see that. Well, I thank you, Genry. But my business is unlearning, not learning, and I'd rather not yet learn an art that would change the world entirely. By your own foretelling, this world will change, and within 5 years. And I'll change with it, Genry, but I have no wish to change it. It was raining, the long, fine rain of Gethenian summer. We walked under the hemon trees on the slopes above the fastness, where there were no paths. Light fell gray among dark branches. Clear water dropped from the scarlet needles. The air was chill yet mild, and full of the sound of rain. Faxa, tell me this. You, Henderata, have a gift that men on every world have craved. You have it. You can predict the future, and yet you live like the rest of us. It doesn't seem to matter. How should it matter, Genry? Well, look. For instance, this rivalry between Karhide and Orgoreyn, this quarrel about the Sinoth Valley. Karhide has lost face badly these last weeks, I gather. Now, why didn't King Argoven consult his foretellers, asking which course to take, or which member of the Kiorami to choose as prime minister, or something of that sort? The questions are hard to ask. I don't see why. He might simply ask, who'll serve me best as prime minister, and leave it at that. He might. But he doesn't know what serving him best may mean. It might mean the man chosen would surrender the valley to Orgoreyn, or go into exile, or assassinate the king. It might mean many things he wouldn't expect or accept. He'd have to make his question very precise. Yes. Then there'd be many questions, you see. Even the king must pay the price. You charge him high? Very high, said Faxa tranquilly. The asker pays what he can afford, as you know. The kings have, in fact, come to the foretellers, but not very often. What if one of the foretellers is himself a powerful man? Indwellers of the fastness have no rank or status. I may be sent to Erenrang to the Kiorami. Well, if I go, I take back my status and my shadow, but my foretelling's at an end. If I had a question while I served in the Kiorami, I'd go to Orgoreyn fastness there, pay my price, and get my answer. But we in the Handara don't want answers. It's hard to avoid them, but we try to. Faxa, I don't think I understand. Well, we come here to the fastness mostly to learn what questions not to ask. But you're the answerers. You don't see yet, Genry, why we perfected and practice foretelling. No, to exhibit the perfect uselessness of knowing the answer to the wrong question. I pondered that a good while as we walked side by side through the rain under the dark branches of the forest of Otherhold. Within the white hood, Faxa's face was tired and quiet, its light quenched. Yet he still awed me a little. When he looked at me with his clear, kind, candid eyes, he looked at me out of a tradition 13,000 years old, a way of thought and a way of life so old, so well established, so integral and coherent as to give a human being the unself-consciousness, the authority, the completeness of a wild animal, a great strange creature who looks straight at you out of his eternal present. The unknown, said Faxa's soft voice in the forest, the unforetold, the unproven, that is what life is based on. Ignorance is the ground of thought. Unproof is the ground of action. If it were proven that there is no God, there would be no religion. No Handara, no Yomesh, no hearth gods, nothing. But if it were proven that there is a God, there would be no religion. Tell me, Genry, what is known? What is sure, predictable, inevitable? The one certain thing you know concerning your future and mine. That we shall die. Yes, there's really only one question that can be answered, Genry, and we already know the answer. The only thing that makes life possible is permanent, intolerable uncertainty, not knowing what comes next. Chapter 6. One Way In to Orgoreyn. The cook, who was always at the house very early, woke me up. I sleep sound, and he had to shake me and say in my ear, wake up, Lord Estraven. There's a runner come from the king's house." At last I understood him, and confused by sleep and urgency, got up in haste and went to the door of my room, where the messenger waited, and so I entered, stark naked and stupid as a newborn child, into my exile. Reading the paper the runner gave me, I said in my mind that I had looked for this, though not so soon. But when I must watch the man nail that damned paper on the door of the house, then I felt as if he might as well be driving the nails into my eyes, and I turned from him and stood blank and bereft, undone with pain, which I had not looked for. That fit past, I saw what must be done, and by 9th hour striking on the gongs was gone from the palace. There was nothing to keep me long. I took what I could take. As for properties and banked moneys, I could not raise cash from them without endangering the men I dealt with, and the better friends they were to me, the worse their danger. I wrote to my old kemmering Asha how he might get the profit of certain valuable things to keep for our son's use, but told him not to try and send me money, for Tybe would have the border watched. I could not sign the letter. To call anyone by telephone would be to send them to jail, and I hurried to be gone before some friend should come in innocence to see me and lose his money and his freedom as a reward for his friendship. I set off west through the city. I stopped at a street crossing and thought, why should I not go east, across the mountains and the plains, back to Kermland, a poor man afoot, and so come home to Estra where I was born, that stone house on a bitter mountainside? Why not go home? 3 times or 4 I stopped thus and looked back. Each time I saw among the indifferent street faces one that might be the spy sent to see me out of Erenrong, and each time I thought of the folly of trying to go home. As well kill myself. I was born to live in exile, it appeared, and my one way home was by way of dying. So I went on westward and turned back no more. The 3 days' grace I had would see me, given no mishap, at the farthest to Estraven on the Gulf, 85 miles. Most exiles have had a night's warning of the order of their exile, and so a chance to take passage on a ship down the cess before the shipmasters are liable to punishment for giving aid. Such courtesy was not in Tibe's vein. No shipmaster would dare take me now. They all knew me at the port, I having built it for Orgoreyn. No land boat would let me ride, and to the land border from Erenrong is 400 miles. I had no choice but Estraven afoot. The cook had seen that. I had sent him off at once, but leaving, he had set out all the ready food he could find, done up in a packet as fuel for my 3 days' run. That kindness saved me, and also saved my courage, for whenever on the road I ate of that fruit and bread, I thought, there's one man that thinks me no traitor, for he gave me this. It is hard, I found, to be called traitor. Strange how hard it is, for it's an easy name to call another man, a name that sticks, that fits, that convinces. I was half convinced myself. I came to Estraven at dusk of the 3rd day, anxious and footsore. For these last years in Erenrong I had gone all to grease and luxury and had lost my wind for walking, and there waiting for me at the gate of the little town was Asha. 7 years we were kemmerings, and had 2 sons. Being of his flesh born, they had his name, Forith Remir Osborth, and were reared in that clan hearth. 3 years ago, he had gone to Orgoreyn fastness, and he wore now the gold chain of a celibate of the foretellers. We had not seen each other in those 3 years, yet seeing his face in the twilight under the arch of stone, I felt the old habit of our love, as if it had been broken yesterday, and knew the faithfulness in him that had sent him to share my ruin. And feeling the unavailing bond close on me anew, I was angry, for Asha's love had always forced me to act against my heart. I went on past him. If I must be cruel, no need to hide it, pretending kindness. Therum, he called after me and followed. I went fast down the steep streets of Estraven toward the wharves. A south wind was blowing up from the sea, rustling the black trees of the gardens, and through that warm, stormy summer dusk I hastened from him as from a murderer. He caught up with me, for I was too footsore to keep up my pace. He said, Therum, I'll go with you. I made no answer. 10 years ago in this month of Tua we took oath, and 3 years ago you broke it, leaving me, which was a wise choice. I never broke the vow we swore, Therum. True, there was none to break. It was a false vow, a second vow. You know it. You knew it then. The only true vow of faithfulness I ever swore was not spoken, nor could it be spoken, and the man I swore it to is dead, and the promise broken long ago. You owe me nothing, nor I you. Let me go. As I spoke, my anger and bitterness turned from Asha against myself and my own life, which lay behind me like a broken promise. But Asha did not know this, and the tears stood in his eyes. He said, Will you take this, Therum? I owe you nothing, but I love you well. He held out a little packet to me. "No. I have money, Asha. Let me go. I must go alone." I went on, and he did not follow me. But my brother's shadow followed me. I had done ill to speak of him. I had done ill in all things. I found no luck waiting for me at the harbor. No ship from Orgoreyn lay in the port that I might board and so be off Karhide's ground by midnight, as I was bound to be. Few men were on the wharves, and those few all hurrying homeward. The one I found to speak to, a fisherman mending the engine of his boat, looked once at me and turned his back on speaking. At that I was afraid. The man knew me. He would not have known unwarned. Tybe had sent his hirelings to forestall me and keep me in Karhide till my time ran out. I had been busy with pain and rage, but not with fear till now. I had not thought that the order of exile might be mere pretext for my execution. Once sixth hour struck, I was fair game for Tybe's men, and none could cry murder, but only justice done. I sat down on a ballast sack of sand there in the windy glare and darkness of the port. The sea slapped and sucked at the pilings, and fishing boats jogged at their moorings, and out at the end of the long pier burned a lamp. I sat and stared at the light and past it at darkness over the sea. Some rise to present danger, not I. My gift is forethought. Threatened closely, I grow stupid, and sit on a bag of sand, wondering if a man could swim to Orgoreyn. The ice has been out of Characine Gulf for a month or two. One might stay alive a while in the water. It is 150 miles to the Orgota shore. I do not know how to swim. When I looked away from the sea and back up the streets of Estraven, I found myself looking for Asha in hopes he was still following me. Having come to that, shame pushed me out of stupor, and I was able to think. Bribery or violence was my choice if I dealt with that fisherman still at work in his boat in the inner dock. A faulty engine seemed not worth either. Theft, then. But the engines of fishing craft are locked. To bypass the locked circuit, start the engine, steer the boat out of dock under the pier lamps and so off to Orgoreyn, having never run a motorboat, seemed a silly, desperate venture. I had not run a boat, but rowed one on Icefoot Lake in Kerm, and there was a rowboat tied up to the outer dock between the two launches. No sooner seen than stolen. I ran out the pier under the staring lamps, hopped onto the boat, untied the painter, shipped the oars, and rowed out onto the swelling harbor water where the lights slipped and dazzled on black waves. When I was pretty well away, I stopped rowing to reset the thole of one oar, for it was not working smoothly, and I had, though I hoped to be picked up next day by an Orgota patrol or fisherman, a good bit of rowing to do. As I bent to the oarlock, a weakness ran all through my body. I thought I would faint, and crouched back in a heap on the thwart. It was the sickness of cowardice overcoming me. But I had not known my cowardice lay so heavily in my belly. I lifted my eyes and saw two figures on the pier's end like two jumping black twigs in the distant electric glare across the water, and then I began to think that my paralysis was not an effect of terror, but of a gun at extreme range. I could see that one of them held a foray gun, and had it been past midnight, I suppose he would have fired it and killed me. But the foray gun makes a loud noise, and that would want explaining. So they had used a sonic gun. At stun setting, a sonic gun can locate its resonance field only within 100 feet or so. I did not know its range at lethal setting, but I had not been far out of it, for I was doubled up like a baby with colic. I found it hard to breathe, the weakened field having caught me in the chest. As they would soon have a powered boat out to come finish me off, I could not spend any more time hunched over my oars gasping. Darkness lay behind my back, before the boat, and into darkness I must row. I rowed with the weak arms, watching my hands to make sure I kept hold of the oars, for I could not feel my grip. I came thus into rough water and the dark, out on the open gulf. There I had to stop. With each oar stroke, the numbness of my arms increased. My heart kept bad time, and my lungs had forgotten how to get air. I tried to row, but I was not sure my arms were moving. I tried to pull the oars into the boat then, but could not. When the sweep light of a harbor patrol ship picked me out of the night like a snowflake on soot, I could not even turn my eyes away from the glare. They unclenched my hands from the oars, hauled me up out of the boat, and laid me out like a gutted blackfish on the deck of the patrol ship. I felt them look down at me, but could not well understand what they said, except for one, the ship's master by his tone. He said, "It's not 6th hour yet," and again answering another, "What affair of mine is that? The king exiled him. I'll follow the king's order, no lesser man's." So against radio commands from Tibe's men ashore, and against the arguments of his mate, who feared retribution, that officer of the Kusaban patrol took me across the Gulf of Charasin and set me ashore safe in the Scheldt port of Orgoreyn. Whether he did this in Shifgrathor against Tibe's men who would kill an unarmed man, or in kindness, I do not know. Nusuth. The admirable is inexplicable. I got up on my feet when the Orgota coast came gray out of the morning fog, and I made my legs move, and walked from the ship into the waterfront streets of Scheldt, but somewhere there I fell down again. When I woke, I was in the Commensal Hospital of Charasun, Coastal Area 4, 24th Commensality, Senethi. I made sure of this, for it was engraved or embroidered in Orgota script on the headpiece of the bed, the lampstand by the bed, the metal cup on the bed table, the nurse's hibes, the bed covers, and the bed shirt I wore. A physician came and said to me, Why did you resist Dotha?" "I was not in Dotha," I said. "I was in a sonic field." "Your symptoms were those of a person who has resisted the relaxation phase of Dotha." He was a domineering old physician, and made me admit at last that I might have used Dotha strength to counter the paralysis while I rode, not clearly knowing that I did so. Then this morning, during the Thangan phase, when one must keep still, I had got up and walked and so nearly killed myself. When all that was settled to his satisfaction, he told me I could leave in a day or two, and went on to the next bed. Behind him came the inspector. Behind every man in Orgoreyn comes the inspector. Name? I did not ask his. I must learn to live without shadows as they do in Orgoreyn, not to take offense, not to offend uselessly. But I did not give him my land name, which is no business of any man in Orgoreyn. Thermharth? That is not an Orgotan name. What commensality? Karhide. And that is not a commensality of Orgoreyn. Where are your papers of entry and identification? Where were my papers? I had been considerably rolled about in the streets of Scheldt before someone had carried me off to the hospital, where I had arrived without papers, belongings, coat, shoes, or cash. When I heard this, I let go of anger and laughed. At the pit's bottom is no anger. The inspector was offended by my laughter. Do you not understand that you are an indigent and unregistered alien? How do you intend to return to Karhide? I coffin. You are not to give inappropriate answers to official questions. If you have no intention to return to your own country, you will be sent to the voluntary farm, where there is a place for criminal riffraff, aliens, and unregistered persons. There is no other place for indigents and subversives in Orgoreyn. You had better declare your intention to return to Karhide within 3 days, or I shall be... I'm proscribed from Karhide. The physician, who had turned around from the next bed at the sound of my name, drew the inspector aside and muttered at him a while. The inspector got to looking sour as bad beer, and when he came back to me, he said, taking long to say it and grudging me each word, Then I assume you will declare your intention to me to enter application for permission to obtain permanent residence in the great commensality of Orgoreyn, pending your obtaining and retaining useful employment as a digit of a commensality or township. I said, yes. The joke was out of it with that word permanent, a skull word if there ever was one. After 5 days, I was granted permanent residence, pending my registry as a digit in the township of Mishnori, which I had requested, and was issued temporary papers of identification for the journey to that city. I would have been hungry those 5 days if the old physician had not kept me in the hospital. He liked having a prime minister of Karhide in his ward, and the prime minister was grateful. I worked my way to Mishnori as a landboat loader on a fresh fish caravan from Shelt. A fast, smelly trip, ending in the great markets of South Mishnori, where I soon found work in the ice houses. There is always work in such places in summer, with the loading and packing and storing and shipping of perishable stuff. I handled mostly fish, and lodged in an island by the markets with my fellows from the ice house. Fish Island, they called it. It stank of us. But I liked the job for keeping me most of the day in the refrigerated warehouse. Mishnori in summer is a steam bath. The doors of the hills are shut. The river boils. Men sweat. In the month of Orgoreyn, there were 10 days and nights when the temperature never went below 60 degrees, and one day the heat rose to 88 degrees. Driven out into that smelting furnace from my cold fishy refuge at day's end, I would walk a couple of miles to the Kunderer embankment, where there are trees and one may see the great river, though not get down to it. There I would roam late and go back at last to Fish Island through the fierce, close night. In my part of Mishnori, they broke the street lamps to keep their doings in the dark, but the inspectors' cars were forever snooping and spotlighting those dark streets, taking from poor men their one privacy, the night. The new alien registry law enacted in the month of Kus as a move in the shadow fight with Karhide invalidated my registration and lost me my job, and I spent a half-month waiting in the anterooms of infinite inspectors. My mates at work lent me money and stole fish for my dinner so that I got re-registered before I starved, but I had heard the lesson. I liked those hard, loyal men, but they lived in a trap there was no getting out of, and I had work to do among people I liked less. I made the calls I had put off for 3 months. Next day, I was washing out my shirt in the wash house in the courtyard of Fish Island along with several others, all of us naked or half naked, when through the steam and stink of grime and fish and the clatter of water, I heard someone call me by my land name. And there was Commensal Yegni in the wash-house, looking just as he had at the reception of the archipelagan ambassador in the ceremonial hall of the palace in Erenrung 7 months before. "Come along out of this, Estraven," he said in the high, loud, nasal voice of the Mishnori rich. "Oh, leave the damned shirt." "I haven't got another." "Fish it out of that soup, then, and come on. It's hot in here." The others stared at him with dour curiosity, knowing him as a rich man, but they did not know him for a commensal. I did not like his being there. He should have sent someone after me. Very few Orgota have any feeling for decency. I wanted to get him out of there. The shirt was no good to me wet, so I told a hearthless lad that hung about the courtyard to keep it on his back for me till I returned. My debts and rent were paid, and my papers were in my hide pocket. Shirtless, I left the island in the markets and went with Yegi back among the houses of the powerful. As his secretary, I was again re-registered in the rolls of Orgoreyn, not as a digit, but as a dependent. Names won't do. They must have labels, and say the kind before they can see the thing. But this time their label fit. I was dependent, and soon was brought to curse the purpose that brought me here to eat another man's bread. For they gave me no sign for a month yet that I was any nearer achieving that purpose than I had been at Fish Island. On the rainy evening of the last day of summer, Yege sent for me to his study, where I found him talking with the commensal of Skevi district, Obsley, who I had known when he heralded the Orgoreyn Naval Trade Commission in Erinrong. Short and sway-backed, with little triangular eyes and a fat, flat face, he was an odd match with Yegi, all delicacy and bone. The frump and the fop they looked, but they were something more than that. They were 2 of the 33 who rule Orgoreyn, yet again they were something more than that. Politenesses exchanged and a dram of Sithish life-water drunk, Obsley sighed and said to me, Now tell me why you did what you did in Sasanoth Estraven, for if there was ever a man I thought was unable to err in the timing of an act or the weighing of Shifgrithor, that man was you. Fear outweighed caution in me, commensal. Fear of what? The devil? What are you afraid of, Estraven? Of what's happening now. The continuation of the prestige struggle in the Sinoth Valley, the humiliation of Karhide, the anger that rises from the humiliation, the use of the anger by the Karhidish government. Use? To what end? Obsley had no manners. Yege, delicate and prickly, broke in. Commensal, Lord Estraven is my guest and need not suffer questioning. Lord Estraven will answer questions when and as he sees fit, as he ever did, said Obsley, grinning, a needle hidden in a heap of grease. He knows himself between friends here. I take my friends where I find them, commensal, but I no longer look to keep them long. I can see that. Yet we can pull a sledge together without being kemmerings, as we say in Escave. Eh? What the devil? I know what you were exiled for, my dear, for liking Karhide better than its king. Rather for liking the king better than his cousin, perhaps. Or liking Karhide better than Orgoreyn, said Yege. Am I wrong, Lord Estraven? No, commensal. You think, then, said Obsley, that Tybe wants to run Karhide as we run Orgoreyn, efficiently? I do. I think that Tybe, using the Sinoth Valley dispute as a goad, and sharpening it at need, may within a year work a greater change in Karhide than the last 1,000 years have seen. He has a model to work from, the Sarf, and he knows how to play on Argoven's fears. That's easier than trying to arouse Argoven's courage, as I did. If Tybe succeeds, you gentlemen will find you have an enemy worthy of you. Obsley nodded. I wave Shifgrithor, said Yege. What are you getting at, Estraven? This. Will the great continent hold 2 Orgoreins? Aye. The same thought, said Obsley. The same thought you planted in my head a long time ago, Estraven, and I can never uproot it. Our shadow grows too long. It will cover Karhide, too. A feud between 2 clans, yes. A foray between 2 towns, yes. A border dispute and a few barn burnings and murders, yes. But a feud between 2 nations? A feud involving 50 million souls? Oh, by Mesh's sweet milk, that's a picture that has set fire to my sleep some nights and made me get up sweating. We are not safe. We are not safe. You know it, Yege. You've said it in your own way many times. I voted 13 times now against pressing the Sinoth Valley dispute. But what good? The domination faction holds 20 votes ready at command, and every move of Tybe strengthens the Sarf's control over those 20. He builds a fence across the valley, puts guards along the fence armed with foray guns. Foray guns! I thought they kept them in museums. He feeds the domination faction a challenge whenever they need one. And so strengthens Orgoreyn, but also Karhide. Every response you make to his provocation, every humiliation you inflict upon Karhide, every gain in your prestige will serve to make Karhide stronger until it is your equal. Controlled all from one center as Orgoreyn is. And in Karhide, they don't keep guns in museums. The king's guard carry them. Yege poured out another dram around of life water. Orgota noblemen drink that precious fire, brought 5,000 miles over the foggy seas from Sith, as if it were beer. Obsley wiped his mouth and blinked his eyes. Well, he said, all that is much as I thought, and much as I think, and I think we have a sledge to pull together. But I have a question before we get in harness, Estraven. You have my hood drawn over my eyes entirely. Now tell me, what was all this obscuration, obfuscation, and fiddle-faddle concerning an envoy from the far side of the moon? Genly, I, then, had requested permission to Orgoreyn. The envoy? He is what he says he is, and that is an envoy from another world. None of your damned shadowy Karhidish metaphors now, Estraven. I wave Shifgrathor. I discard it. Will you answer me? I have done so. He is an alien being, Obsley said, and Yege, and he has had audience with King Argoven? I answered yes to both. They were silent a minute, and then both started to speak at once, neither trying to mask his interest. Yege was for circumambulating, but Obsley went to the point. Was he in your plans, then? You staked your life on him, it seems, and fell. Why? Because Tybe tripped me. I had my eyes on the stars and didn't watch the mud I walked in. You've taken up astronomy, my dear? We'd all better take up astronomy, Obsley. Is he a threat to us, the envoy? I think not. He brings from his people offers of communication, trade, treaty, and alliance, nothing else. He came alone, without arms or defense, with nothing but a communicating device and his ship, which he allowed us to examine completely. He is not to be feared, I think. Yet he brings the end of kingdom and commensalities with him in his empty hands. Why? How shall we deal with strangers except as brothers? How shall Gethen treat with a union of 80 worlds except as a world? 80 worlds, said Yege, and laughed uneasily. Obsley stared at me athwart and said, I'd like to think that you've been too long with the madman in his palace and had gone mad yourself. Name of Mesha! What's this babble of alliances with the suns and treaties with the moon? How did the fellow come here riding on a comet? Astride a meteor? A ship? What sort of ship floats on air, on void space? Yet you're no madder than you ever were, Estraven, which is to say shrewdly mad, wisely mad. All Karhiders are insane. Lead on, my lord, I follow. Go on. I go nowhere, Obsley. Where have I to go? You, however, may get somewhere. If you should follow the envoy a little way, he might show you a way out of the Sinolf Valley, out of the evil course we're caught in. Very good, I'll take up astronomy in my old age. Where will it lead me? Towards greatness, if you go more wisely than I went. Gentlemen, I've been with the envoy. I've seen his ship that crossed the void, and I know that he is truly and exactly a messenger from elsewhere than this earth. And to the honesty of his message and the truth of his descriptions of that elsewhere, there is no knowing. One can only judge as one would judge any man. If he were one of us, I would call him honest. I would call him an honest man. That you'll judge for yourselves, perhaps, but this is certain. In his presence, lines drawn on the earth make no boundaries and no defense. There is a greater challenge than Karhide at the doors of Orgoreyn. The men who meet that challenge, who first open the doors of earth, will be the leaders of us all. All, the 3 continents, all the earth. Our border now is no line between 2 hills, but the line our planet makes encircling the sun. To stake Shifgrathor on any lesser chance is a fool's doing now. I had Yege, but Obsley sat sunk in his fat, watching me from his small eyes. This will take a month's believing, he said. And if it came from anyone's mouth but yours, Estraven, I'd believe it to be pure hoax, a net for our pride woven out of starshine. But I know you're stiff-neck, too stiff to stoop to an assumed disgrace in order to fool us. I can't believe you're speaking the truth, and yet I know a lie would choke you. Well, well, will he speak to us as it seems he spoke to you? That what he seeks, to speak, to be heard. There or here. Tybe will silence him if he tries to be heard again in Karhide. I am afraid for him. He seems not to understand his danger. Will you tell us what you know? I will, but there is a reason why he can't come here and tell. But is there a reason why he can't come here and tell you himself? Yege said, biting his nails delicately. I think not. He has requested permission to enter the commensality. Karhide makes no objection. His request is under consideration. So this is chapter 7, the question of sex. This is another excerpt from the field notes of Ongtot Opong, investigator of the first ecumenical landing party on Gethin/Winter, cycle 93 EY, 1448. This is the guy who we heard from at the very start of the book, who has, frankly, an even narrower and more backwards binarist idea of gender than Genly does. So heads up for that. (1448) Day 81. It seems likely that they were an experiment. The thought is unpleasant, but now that there is evidence to indicate that with its own proto-hominid autochthons, the possibility cannot be ignored. Human genetic manipulation was certainly practiced by the colonizers. Nothing else explains the Hilfs of S, or the degenerate winged hominids of Rokanan. Will anything else explain Gethenian sexual physiology? Accident, possibly. Natural selection, hardly. Their ambisexuality has little or no adaptive value. Why pick so harsh a world for an experiment? No answer. The Tinnibassel thinks the colony was introduced during a major interglacial. Conditions may have been fairly mild for their first 40 or 50,000 years here. By the time the ice was advancing again, the Hainish withdrawal was complete, and the colonists were on their own, an experiment abandoned. I theorize about the origins of Gethenian sexual physiology. What do I actually know about it? Oti Nim's communication from the Orgoreyn region has cleared up some of my earlier misconceptions. Let me set down all I know, and after that my theories. First things first. The sexual cycle averages 26 to 28 days. They tend to speak of it as 26 days, approximating it to the lunar cycle. For 21 or 22 days, the individual is somer, sexually inactive, latent. On about the 18th day, hormonal changes are initiated by the pituitary control, and on the 22nd or 23rd day, the individual enters kemmer, estrus. In this first phase of kemmer, karch, secher, he remains completely androgynous. Gender and potency are not attained in isolation. A Gethenian in first phase kemmer, if kept alone or with others not in kemmer, remains incapable of coitus. Yet the sexual impulse is tremendously strong in this phase, controlling the entire personality, subjecting all other drives to its imperative. When the individual finds a partner in kemmer, hormonal secretion is further stimulated, most importantly by touch, secretion, scent, until in one partner either a male or female hormonal dominance is established. The genitals engorge or shrink accordingly, foreplay intensifies, and the partner, triggered by the change, takes on the other sexual role. Question mark? Without exception? If there are exceptions, resulting in kemmer partners of the same sex, they are so rare as to be ignored. This second phase of kemmer, Karhidish Thorharmen, the mutual process of establishing sexuality and potency, apparently occurs within a time span of 2 to 20 hours. If one of the partners is already in full kemmer, the phase for the newer partner is liable to be quite short. If the two are entering kemmer together, it is likely to take longer. Normal individuals have no predisposition to either sexual role in kemmer. They do not know whether they will be the male or the female and have no choice in the matter. Oti Nim writes that in the Orgoreyn region, the use of hormone derivatives to establish a preferred sexuality is quite common. I haven't seen this done in rural Karhide. Once the sex is determined, it cannot change during the kemmer period. The culminant phase of kemmer, Karhidish Thalkemmer, lasts from 2 to 5 days, during which sexual drive and capacity are at maximum. It ends fairly abruptly, and if conception has not taken place, the individual returns to the somer phase within a few hours. Note, Adi Nim thinks this fourth phase is the equivalent of the menstrual cycle, and the cycle begins anew. If the individual was in the female role and was impregnated, hormonal activity, of course, continues. And for the 8.4-month gestation period and the 6 to 8-month lactation period, this individual remains female. The male sexual organs remain retracted, as they are in somer. The breasts enlarge somewhat, and the pelvic girdle widens. With the cessation of lactation, the female re-enters somer and becomes once more a perfect androgyne. No physiological habit is established, and the mother of several children may be the father of several more. Social observations. Very superficial as yet. I have been moving about too much to make coherent social observations. Kemmer is not always played by pairs. Pairing seems to be the commonest custom, but in the kemmer houses of towns and cities, groups may form and intercourse may take place promiscuously among the males and females of the group. The furthest extreme from this practice is the custom of vowing kemmering, Karhidish Oskjomer, which is, to all intents and purposes, monogamous marriage. It has no legal status, but socially and ethically is an ancient and vigorous institution. The whole structure of the Karhidish clan hearths and domains is indubitably based upon the institution of monogamous marriage. I am not sure of divorce rules in general. Here in Osnorinir, there is no divorce. Here in Osnorinir, there is divorce, but no remarriage after either divorce or the partner's death. One can only vow kemmering once. Descent, of course, is reckoned all over Gethen from the mother, the parent of the flesh, Karhidish Amha. Incest is permitted, with various restrictions between siblings, even the full siblings of a vowed kemmering pair. Siblings are not, however, allowed to vow kemmering, nor keep kemmering after the birth of a child to one of the pair. Incest between generations is strictly forbidden in Karhide Orgoreyn, but is said to be permitted among the tribesmen of Perunter, the Antarctic continent. This may be slander. What else have I learned for certain? That seems to sum it up. There is one feature of this anomalous arrangement that might have adaptive value. Since coitus takes place only during the period of fertility, the chance of conception is high, as with all mammals that have an estrus cycle. In harsh conditions where infant mortality is great, a race survival value may be indicated. At present, neither infant mortality nor the birth rate runs high in the civilized areas of Gethen. Tinnabossel estimates a population of not over 100 million on the 3 continents and considers it to have been stable for at least a millennium. Ritual and ethical abstention and the use of contraceptive drugs seem to have played the major part in maintaining this stability. There are aspects of ambisexuality which we have only glimpsed or guessed at, and which we may never grasp entirely. The kemmer phenomenon fascinates all of us investigators, of course. It fascinates us, but it rules the Gethenians, dominates them. The structure of their societies, the management of their industry, agriculture, commerce, the size of their settlements, the subject of their stories, everything is shaped to fit the Somer-Kemmer cycle. Everybody has his holiday once a month. No one, whatever his position, is obliged or forced to work when in kemmer. No one is barred from the kemmer house, however poor or strange. Everything gives way before the recurring torment and festivity of passion. This is easy for us to understand. What is very hard for us to understand is that 4/5 of the time, these people are not sexually motivated at all. Room is made for sex, plenty of room, but a room, as it were, apart. The society of Gethen, in its daily functioning and in its continuity, is without sex. Consider, anyone can turn his hand to anything. This sounds very simple, but its psychological effects are incalculable. The fact that everyone between 17 and 35 or so is liable to be, as Nim puts it, tied down to childbearing, implies that no one is quite so thoroughly tied down here as women elsewhere are likely to be, psychologically or physically. Burden and privilege are shared out pretty equally. Everybody has the same risk to run or choice to make. Therefore, nobody here is quite so free as a free male anywhere else. Consider, a child has no psychosexual relationship to his mother and father. There is no myth of Oedipus on Winter. Consider, there is no unconsenting sex, no rape. As with most mammals other than man, coitus can be performed only by mutual invitation and consent. Otherwise, it is not possible. Seduction certainly is possible, but it must have to be awfully well timed. Consider, there is no division of humanity into strong and weak halves, protected, dominant, submissive, owner, chattel, active, passive. In fact, the whole tendency to dualism that pervades human thinking may be found to be lessened or changed on Winter. The following must go into my finished directives. When you meet a Gethenian, you cannot and must not do what a bisexual naturally does, which is to cast him in the role of man or woman, while adopting towards him a corresponding role dependent on your expectations of the patterned or possible interactions between persons of the same or the opposite sex. Our entire pattern of socio-sexual interaction is non-existent here. They cannot play the game. They do not see one another as men or women. This is almost impossible for our imagination to accept. What is the first question we ask about a newborn baby? Yet you cannot think of a Gethenian as it. They are not neuters. They are potentials or integrals. Lacking the Karhidish human pronoun used for persons in Somer, I must say he, for the same reason we used the masculine pronoun in referring to a transcendent god. It is less defined, less specific than the neuter or the feminine. But the very use of the pronoun in my thoughts leads me continually to forget that the Karhider I am with is not a man, but a man-woman. The first mobile, if one is sent, must be warned that unless he is very self-assured or senile, his pride will suffer. A man wants his virility regarded, a woman wants her femininity appreciated, however indirect and subtle the indications of regard and appreciation. On Winter, they will not exist. One is respected and judged only as a human being. It is an appalling experience. Back to my theory. Contemplating the motives for such an experiment, if such it was, and trying perhaps to exculpate our Hainish ancestors from the guilt of barbarism, of treating lives as things, I have made some guesses as to what they might have been after. The Somer-Kemmer cycle strikes us as degrading, a return to the estrus cycle of the lower mammals, a subjection of human beings to the mechanical imperative of rut. It is possible that the experimenters wished to see whether human beings lacking continuous sexual potentiality would remain intelligent and capable of culture. On the other hand, the limitation of sexual drive to a discontinuous time segment and the equalizing of it in androgyny must prevent, to a large extent, both the exploitation and frustration of the drive. There must be sexual frustration, though society provides as well as it can against it, so long as the social unit is large enough that more than one person will be in kemmer at one time. Sexual fulfillment is fairly certain. But at least it cannot build up. It is over when kemmer is over. Fine. They are spared much waste and madness, but what is left in Somer? What is there to sublimate? What would a society of eunuchs achieve? But of course they are not eunuchs in Somer, but rather more comparable to preadolescents, not castrate but latent. Another guess concerning the hypothetical experiment's object, the elimination of war. Did the ancient Hainish postulate that continuous sexual capacity and organized sexual aggression, neither of which are attributes of any mammal but man, are cause and effect? Or, like Tumas Song Angot, did they consider war to be a purely masculine displacement activity, a vast rape, and therefore, in their experiment, eliminate the masculinity that rapes and the femininity that is raped? God knows. The fact is that Gethenians, though highly competitive, as proved by the elaborate social channels provided for competition for prestige, etc., seem not to be very aggressive. At least they apparently have never yet had what one could call a war. They kill one another readily by ones and twos, seldom by tens or twenties, never by hundreds or thousands. Why? It may turn out to have nothing to do with their androgen psychology. There are not very many of them, after all, and there is the climate. The weather of winter is so relentless, so near the limit of tolerability even to them with all of their cold adaptations, that perhaps they use up their fighting spirit fighting the cold. The marginal peoples, the races that just get by, are rarely the warriors. And in the end, the dominant factor in Gethenian life is not sex or any other human thing. It is their environment, their cold world. Here man has a crueler enemy even than himself. I am a woman of peaceful Chippewa, and no expert on the attractions of violence or the nature of war. Someone else will have to think this out, but I really don't see how anyone could put much stock in victory or glory after he had spent a winter on winter, and seen the face of the ice. Okay. Let me see how many pages until chapter 9. I think I'm gonna call it, and we'll pick up with chapter 8 on like Wednesday, maybe. Thanks for joining me. I hope you liked that. Stay home, stay healthy, and have a good night. Bye.